Hello, second grade families. I hope everyone is enjoying their extra time with their families during this quarantine. Make sure you're only going out if you absolutely need to. We got some toilet paper yesterday. Whoop, whoop. All right, guys, moving on to our lesson. So remember, when you turn in your work, you're going to watch the video. Somewhere in the video, I'm going to give you a task or assignment to do. You're going to click on classwork, and then you're going to click for that week that we're in. And you can just type in the private comments what your work was. So if I ask you to sing Twinkle Twinkle in a high voice and a low voice, you would be like, oh, so-and-so sang Twinkle Twinkle in a high voice and a low voice. You can send me a video if you want. You don't have to. You just need to let me know that you did it so I can give you your points. Remember, we had the classical music madness bracket going on right now. Thank you for all of you who are participating. We had 97 different entries in the last one that I just posted the results for yesterday. When I get done with all these videos tonight, getting them uploaded, or maybe in the morning, depending on how long this takes, I will post the next round of results as well. I am super excited with how this is going, and I am so happy that so many of you are enjoying doing this. Today we are going to learn about George Gershwin. I just got this book right before the quarantine when we went down to Tucson and we went to Bookman's. Ask me about Bookman's if you don't know what it is. If you love books and like geeky stuff and music instruments, it's a great place to go. There's two of them in the Valley, one in Mesa, one in North Phoenix, and then there's three down in Tucson. Anyway, so George Gershwin. I would not be surprised if no one knew George Gershwin's name or who he was when I say it. But I would be surprised if you went and listened to his music if you did not know who George Gershwin's music was, because he wrote popular music and a lot of it is still sang today. All right, moving on. So George Gershwin was born in New York City in 1898. He became one of America's greatest composers and is known for his beautiful, exciting concert pieces as well as his popular music that he wrote for plays and movies. Here's George Gershwin at the piano. Yes, that is a cigar in his mouth. If he was born in 1898, remember that there was not really health things like that. I remember my grandparents talking about things about how with like morning sickness, the doctor asking them, not my grandparents, my great grandparents telling great grandma to smoke like a cigarette to help with her morning sickness. Like, remember, all the like health concerns about cigarettes and cigars were not around at that time. Now, George was one of the first composers to mix symphonic music with popular music. He came up with a whole new American sound, and at the time that he was born, America didn't have a serious classical music style of its own. Most American composers borrowed ideas from great European composers like Beethoven, Bach, and Chopin. So this is a painting by David Siqueiros of George Gershwin playing the piano at, does it tell me where? It doesn't say. It's just called George Gershwin. So what they mean by the serious American sound is, remember, America was less than 200 years old in the early 1900s. So we were still a baby compared to most countries. And we didn't really have our own sound yet. We borrowed ideas and things from the great composers like Beethoven, Bach, and Chopin. And to be honest, Chopin was still alive at that time, guys, when George Gershwin was born. Or I think he was. And if he wasn't still alive, he was like, had barely died, because this was the late Romantic period. I'm going to look it up now to make sure I can tell you guys. This was the late Romantic period. So, early modern, and which is really not that far away when you think about it. But so we didn't have our own style, and we just kind of took things from other people that had been around. So yes, he was born he had died about 50 years before that of tuberculosis. That's right. So, but yeah, like, he hadn't been dead that long when he started writing music. He, as in Gershwin, started writing music. And Bach, a couple hundred years. Beethoven, less than 100 years. Like, these guys had not been gone that long, which is kind of what's crazy. Like, when you put like classical music in relation to what was going on in the world, But we didn't have our own sound yet. We just kind of still, like, even like in opera, we only did European operas. There was not American operas. So the first music to come around, though, that was our music, was called jazz music. It was very American. African-American musicians invented it and used ideas from lots of different styles of music. They often combined work songs from slave times and religious folk songs called spirituals with an exciting beat and rhythm. Two other styles of music that helped make up music was ragtime and then also blues. The musicians made up most of the music as they went along, and it played the way they felt at the moment. Because of this, notes were never written down and pieces never sounded exactly the same way twice. So even if you take the exact same group, still today, two jazz groups, or the same jazz group, have them play the song twice, it won't sound the same, because it does. Jazz is a very emotional type of music and kind of goes with how you're feeling. Even like the solos, they don't have notes even today written down for the solos. They'll have like the main bits written down, like the main themes, but the solos are not written down. It just tells you the chords so that they have an idea of what notes to play. All right, here's a painting of New York called Cliff Dwellers by George Wesley Bellows. This is a neighborhood in New York in 1906. So when George was little, New York City was a pretty rough and tough place to grow up. Remember, in 1906, George would have been 8 years old. Neighborhoods were crowded, and there weren't that many parks or playgrounds, so kids had to play in the streets. George liked playing street hockey and stickball, which is baseball with a stick. He learned to fight pretty well, too, and he was one of the best roller skaters around. So New York City, even today, is still very heavily populated. But back then, Ellis Island, all immigrants were still going through Ellis Island, which is where the Statue of Liberty is. So a lot of people already had family in New York, and that was their stop off. That's where they would stop, and then they just wouldn't leave. So you ended up with a lot of people in New York. Now, George didn't seem to have much interest in music until when he was about 7 or 8 years old. He was roller skating through a New York City called Harlem. Harlem was filled with restaurants and clubs where jazz bands played. George never forgot the exciting, lively beat of that music. He often roller skated or hitched rides back to Harlem just so he could sit outside of the restaurants and clubs and listen. And here is our first cute little comic. Excuse me, I'm a little late today. Would you guys mind starting over from the beginning? So there he is going to the Moe's Club to go listen to them play jazz on his little roller skates. A short time later, George heard some classical violin music being played through an open window. He loved the sound, and the kids in George's neighborhood thought only nerds were interested in music. That's kind of still a thing today. As you get older, people only think that like nerds take band, which totally isn't true. Lots of celebrities did band. George didn't care what anyone thought. After that day, he decided he would learn everything he could about music the right way. So here was George, hearing the kid, practicing violin, and all the other kids piled up and him listening. And it says, "What happened?" Somebody called George a wimp. Because remember, George was pretty good at fighting. So it looks like some kids were making fun of him for listening to the boy playing music. And George decided to beat them all up. Not how you should deal with that. George started going to free concerts where he started to listen and enjoy classical music. He even experimented with making up his own songs on a friend's piano. When George was 12, a wonderful thing happened. His parents bought a piano. It was really for his older brother, Ira. Everyone in the family was very surprised when George started playing the piano as soon as he saw it. So here they are, taking the piano up the stairs. I won't lie, the first time I saw this, I thought that the guys in white were doctors. If you think this song is great, wait till you hear the next one. Like, look at him playing upside down. And there's his brother, Ira, over there, I'm guessing. Or that may be a different family. That looks like the boy playing the violin. Let's see. Nope, not the boy playing the violin. But his book is a comic book. So Ira will actually become an important name, too. That's why I was kind of surprised that this book was only on George. Because the Gershwin brothers wrote all kinds of music together. George would write... Ira, I think, usually wrote the lyrics, and George would write the music. But They were a team. Now, George was lucky to find excellent piano teachers when he started taking lessons. By the time he was 15, he was good enough to get a job playing the piano at a company that wrote songs and printed sheet music. It was in the area of New York City called Tin Pan Alley. So here's Tin Pan Alley. No, it wasn't actually an alley. It was a street. So if you'll see, this says music publishers, and then there's like Jerome and Company. So Tin Pan Alley was where people went to get their music published. Back then, like, the recording wasn't as big of a thing. Like, you did have records, but that was super expensive to get a deal on. It wasn't like today where you can just record yourself on TikTok or YouTube and make yourself semi-famous. But they would go try to get their music recorded by playing their music at these places and hoping that the people would write it down and then sell the copies of the sheet music, and then they would get royalties, which is their way of getting paid for it. Now, people would stop by to listen when all the singers and other show business would go and listen for the new acts. So all these singers and other show business people would stop by Tin Pan Alley to listen to new songs for their new acts, because vaudeville was a thing. Vaudeville, kind of think like a talent show per se. It's lots of different variety acts. It's not like a whole story. It was about the only way someone could hear a new song, since there weren't any radios yet, and most people didn't have a record player. Like I talked about, like, sheet music was the way to get your music out there. George got to meet some famous people like Fred Astaire and his sister Adele. Sometimes George played his own songs for them. So here is Fred and George. Now, if you watch any old movies, one of my favorite with Fred Astaire is called Daddy Longlegs. And basically, it has a lot of really good dancing and singing in it. But basically, he meets this girl at an orphanage who is 17, and he decides to adopt her. And he pays for her to go to a really nice school and stuff. And he's kind of just taking her on because, like, he was like, wow, like, she's super talented because she's teaching all these kids at the orphanage to read. And he ends up, like, falling in love with her kind of thing. But other people are like, you're too old for her. And, like, he tries to stay away from her. And it kind of ends up upsetting both of them. And they get together in the end. But he was a really great dancer, singer. He played drums really well. Like, Fred Astaire is awesome. I may post a video of him. I need to make a note. So I told you guys, let me see, what did I tell you guys? I told you guys I would post you some Gershwin music. And I told you guys I would do some Fred Astaire. I have to make notes so I don't forget to do this stuff for you. Because normally I would just play it in class, but I can't do that right now. Well, I could do a screencast, but I would rather just post the videos for you in your own time. Now, George's songs were so lively and fun to listen to that it wasn't long before he became one of them, became a big hit. It was called Swanee. A famous singer of the day, Al Jolson, heard George play Swanee at a party and decided to sing it at his Broadway show. From then on, George found it easier to get jobs writing his own music instead of just playing the music for other composers. So here is a painting by his brother, Ira. Of Ira. It's called My Body. So this is a self-portrait. So he would be like, he's looking in a mirror painting himself. So the song Swanee was played by someone who was already on Broadway. And that guy sang it. And now other people were starting to buy George's music instead of George just making money from playing other composers' music. He was becoming a composer himself. George sometimes asked his brother Ira to write words for the song. So I was right. Ira would write the words. Even though George and Ira were very different types of people, hardly anyone worked better when it came to making music. George and Ira both enjoyed painting. Next to writing music, painting was George's favorite things to do. So here's Ira's picture. If you see, Ira, like, did it in his, like, boxers and his undershirt. And here's George's painting, because he liked to paint. And George, like, has himself all dappered up. And it's kind of interesting, the perspective. It's like you're looking from George's eyes at the mirror, and then you can see him pointing himself. And it kind of talks about their, like, perspective and outlook on themselves. George was becoming well-known all over New York. He even started getting invited to parties given by rich and famous people. Often George was asked to play his music at the parties, and he never seemed to mind, and sometimes he played all night. So here he is at a party playing his song Swanee all night. Swanee, how I love you, how I love ya. Come on, everybody. Join in. But nobody can join in because George was playing and everybody was asleep. And if you look, the sun is coming up. So he played all night. One person who liked George's music a lot was a jazz band leader named Paul Whiteman. Paul thought it was about time to prove that there was important music coming from America being written by American composers, so he put on a serious concert. Paul asked George to write a symphonic jazz-style piece for his concert. So here's Paul Whiteman and his orchestra. You can see he has like his signature too. They even have an accordion. George thought Paul Whiteman's idea was great. This was his chance to show how important American music could be. George called his new musical piece Rhapsody in Blue. He wanted his music to have the sound of modern America so everyone could enjoy it. George wrote parts of Rhapsody in Blue while on a train trip. The noise of the steel wheels on the tracks and the clickety-clack of the train's rhythm gave George lots of ideas for his music, and he often heard music in the noise of machines and traffic and other big city sounds. So here's, you see you got the construction workers, the guys doing trash, and this says, okay, everybody, please start. When I count to 3, this is going to be a great song. And then the sign over there says, caution, men working. And then you see George in the middle of them, just ignoring them. So George used a lot of the sounds around him and was able to find musical sounds in things that did not exactly make sense to other people. There was another composer like that named John Adams, who is later than George, but one of his best quotes is like, music is everywhere because music is just the separation of sound and silence. So he's like, and like he says stuff like, my cat can be music, this can be music. Really, because that's what music is. If you want to get like technical and scientific, music is the separation of sound and silence. We learn about rest, we learn about notes. You have to have both for the music to be interesting. All right, let's keep going. Paul Whitman's famous concert took place on February 12th, 1924. People all over the country turned on their radios. Oh, there's radios now. And the concert hall was packed. Besides George, Paul had invited several other popular American composers to play their newest music. For the first hour or so, things didn't go so well. People didn't find the music very new or interesting, and some of them were getting bored. Then it was George's turn, and George was at the piano, and Paul Whitman led the orchestra. So this was the modern period, and here is a picture of like one of the little brochures, flyers they would have put out. It says, Paul Whitman and his Paris Royal Orchestra will offer an experiment in modern music assisted by Zen Comfrey and George Gershwin. And then there's also Victor Herbert was there, Irving Berlin, George Gershwin will be played for the first time. Aeolian Concert Hall, that was where it was, and tickets were anywhere from 55 cents to $2.20. Now, hardly anyone could believe their ears. Rhapsody in Blue began with a clarinet making a long, whooping, laughing kind of sound that had never been heard before. Next, the orchestra joined in, and finally George Gershwin began playing. When it was over, people couldn't stop, and they loved it. Rhapsody in Blue, I know you guys have heard that one. It's one of my favorite pieces. It's one of the reasons I started playing clarinet. No, I cannot play that song. It's out of my range, but it is an amazing piece. And there's also a really cool video I can get for you guys while you watch that one. So here is George, and he goes, I need someone who can make an unusual whooping sound for my new Rhapsody. And this guy says, well, Mr. Gershwin, if I can't get it done, no one can. And you see that he's got like a bird to make the whooping sound. Rhapsody in Blue made George Gershwin famous all over the world, not just the United States. He went on to write a lot more music for the theater and movies, and much of it was with his brother Ira. So here's a drawing by Al Hirschfeld called Rhapsody. Not called Rhapsody in Blue, sorry. This is just a drawing. It didn't have a name, and this is of Ira and George at the piano. Ira writing the lyrics, George writing the music. They were a deadly combo together. So many of George's and Ira's songs became hits and are still popular today. George continued to write symphonic music too, like a concerto in F and American in Paris. Here, American in Paris was made into a film. This has Gene Kelly and Leslie Caron. So Gene Kelly would have been like, think like the Hugh Jackman of back then. He could sing, he could dance, he could act, he was handsome, he was charming, like that's like Hugh Jackman. Ryan Gosling is a close second when it comes to the same kind of thing. You don't see you didn't really get to see like Ryan's dancing side until La La Land, whereas Hugh Jackman actually started off on Broadway. Hugh Jackman, or in West End, which is like the Broadway of London. Hugh Jackman, by the way, that's the guy who plays Wolverine, for those of you who didn't know. Which just proves to you that music is not for geeks and is cool, because Hugh Jackman is like one of the buffest people I know. George Gershwin's favorite musical piece was his opera called Porgy and Bess. An opera is like a play, except the actors sing instead of speak the words. Porgy and Bess was different from other operas, though. It was about a poor African-American fisherman who lived in a waterfront area of South Carolina called Catfish Row. Here's a program from the production of Porgy and Bess. There's actually a song from that one called Summertime that is super popular. I'm like making notes as we go, guys, because some of these are the ones that I would play you in class. George traveled to South Carolina and stayed near the people he was writing about so he could learn more about them and make the music sound really authentic. Here's a sketch he made of his room in Foley Beach, South Carolina. So the coloring makes it look pretty messy. Like if you look, it's really not that messy. It's just the way that the watercolor is. Because at first I was like, dude, he was a slob, but no, it's just the color. When Porgy and Bess first played in New York City, some people didn't like it. They weren't sure if it was a serious opera, a play, or a comedy that was a musical also. George was disappointed, and he knew his opera was probably the best thing he'd ever done. So here's Cab Calloway as Sport and Life in Broadway's production of Porgy and Bess. Cab Calloway, big guy back then. So there he is in the white suit. George explained, here, I'll hold it up so you can still see. George explained in a newspaper article that Porgy and Bess was a new kind of opera. It was a folk opera. It was about real everyday people rather than just royalty. The opera's music, too, was like the lives of real people, and sometimes the songs were fun and happy. Other times they were serious or sad, and over the years, people began to understand Porgy and Bess. Today is one of the world's most popular operas. So here it is right here. You have two pictures. This one, obviously pretty tense because he's got his hands around the guy's throat. And here's a more lovey scene. This would have been in 1943. George Gershwin died in 1937. His music sounds as new and exciting today as it did when he first wrote it. Sometimes George used other things besides instruments to get just the right mood or sound. In American in Paris, he used real taxi horns. In Second Rhapsody, he used a fly swatter. The best way to get to know Gershwin is to listen to his music. Since it's as popular as ever, it's pretty easy to find on the radio, or you can also use CDs from the library, or just go on Spotify and type in George Gershwin, and you will find a ton of his music. And here's, again, George at the piano, and his brother is at left. So George and then Ira. It doesn't say who the guy in the middle is. I don't know. I wish I could tell you, but I don't know. Alright, guys. So that is your stuff about George Gershwin. So I will post a video of Fred Astaire dancing. I will post a video of someone singing Swanee. I will post a video of Rhapsody in Blue. I will post a video of someone singing Summertime from Porgy and Bess. But your assignment is to do kind of a George Gershwin kind of thing. You're going to find a spot to sit outside. Obviously, you need to be with an adult if you are not in your backyard. Draw a picture of the things outside that you hear making music or musical sounds. Maybe even write a little bit of music yourself, inspired by what you hear outside. Remember, you're going to have to get kind of abstract with your thinking, because what you hear is not necessarily, unless you live by someone who practices outside or has a garage band, is not going to be your typical music. So you're going to have to listen and make the music yourself. All right, guys, that is it for this week. Be looking out for more Classical Music Madness listenings if you are participating in that. Remember, that is optional, but the drawing a picture of the things you hear outside making music is not the optional. That is how you get your points. All right, I will see you guys next week in a video. Bye.